in this video series, I'm going to be providing lectures for those who cannot attend class. So this is meant to be used as a guide and as a reference if you need to use it for studying. But we are going to get started with Unit 1, Lesson 1, Experimental Design. So in this video, we're going to be talking about how do we set up experiments and how do we test hypotheses, come up with questions, and explore the world around us. So the first thing to talk about is the scientific method. So this is the process that we're going to be using throughout class whenever we're trying to figure things out and to design our experiments. So the first thing you need to do is make an observation. So looking at a plant or an animal and coming up with some sort of question about it. How does it act? How does it behave? Why does it look like it does? Why does it behave like it does? And from there you can research the topic. So some people may have done research on your question already, so they may already have the answers that you're looking for. If not, though, you can form a hypothesis and start the experimental process. So hypothesis, we'll talk about what that is here shortly. And once you develop your hypothesis, you can then begin to test your experiment, to design your experiment, and to get results. Once you get the results, analyze them, and then report out. The best thing about science is that everyone is constantly reporting what they find, regardless of whether or not it actually gives results. So reporting your conclusions can help out others who maybe have the same question, or can inspire others to move into your field and continue on with your experiments. So the first thing we have to do is we have to ask a question. And this needs to be focused on one thing, one variable, one topic. So if you want to research adaptations in a certain animal, or if you want to experiment with the behavior of plants, you want to be very focused on what you're trying to understand. You don't want to be really broad. You can't really experiment with what is the meaning of life because there's so much we're going to learn about life that you have to narrow it down. The question must be testable. So we can't have any opinions. You can't experiment on the question of, are dogs better than cats? Because that's an opinion. Some people may think dogs are better than cats. Some may think that cats are better than dogs. So a good question, or a good example of a question: what temperature does frost start to form on a car? Once we develop this question, we can then develop it further into an inference. So an inference is a conclusion that's made by studying observations. So if I observe a bird in a bird bath, the bird I can infer is cleaning itself and removing dirt because it's cleaning itself in the bird bath. We can also then develop a hypothesis. So a hypothesis is a proposed explanation for some sort of phenomenon, some behavior. So this is our idea of why something is, or how something is doing what it's doing. And again, this must be testable. Again, you can't hypothesize that you think that cats are better than dogs because, again, that's an opinion. You can, however, test things like, if we introduce pesticide to this field, then the crop yield will be higher. Or if we analyze the genomes of a bunch of different praying mantises, then we will determine how they are related. So hypotheses must be testable. You have to be able to actually build an experiment off of it. You can't just make an opinion about it. We also have to make observations. So a lot of things that lead into that question are going to be these observations. And observations are learning things using the 5 senses. So touch, smell, taste, feeling, and hearing. These can help lead to our hypotheses and, like I said, lead to our questions. And we have 4 different kinds. So typically the way we look at this is that an observation is either going to be direct or indirect, and it's either going to be qualitative or quantitative. So we can have direct qualitative, direct quantitative, indirect qualitative, or indirect quantitative. So direct observation is one that is made directly by the researcher. You are physically watching this bird do a behavior, or you are physically watching some event take place. Indirect, on the other hand, is going to be gathered from another source. So this is going to include surveys, this could include witness accounts. If you hear about someone hurting their ankle at a football game, that would be an indirect observation. You are not there to watch the injury, but you can hear about it from someone else. Recordings and audio files are also indirect observations because you are not there measuring. You have something in place of you measuring, and you are taking the results from it. Qualitative, if you look at the root word quality, qualitative is going to be a measure of the quality or the description of something. So if we're looking at these senses, so for example, if something changes color, that would be qualitative. If something gets warmer or colder, if we observe behaviors, those will all typically be qualitative. On the other hand, quantitative has to involve numbers, some sort of measurement. If we measure that someone is 5 feet tall, if something has 2 eyes, that it takes 60 minutes to do something, or if we're counting, let's say we count the number of beats per minute someone's heart takes, or if we measure distance or things like that, that would be quantitative. So we are dealing with quantities, not qualities. So let's read through this process, and then we're going to go into how do we design experiments based on things like this. So take a couple minutes, read through the prompt, and then we're going to go over it. Okay, so this article is about a fitness or a gym that wants to offer more courses to keep people more interested in the gym. So they choose 500 people, 250 of them are offered 2 extra classes, and the other 2 are continued with their normal classes. And after 6 months, they analyze how many of the participants were retained and how those classes affected retention. So the point of the experiment was to look into retention. So how can we keep people longer, and how can we advertise to keep people longer? How was the experiment organized? So we have 2 groups. So people were chosen at random. That is something very specific that we have to do with our experiments. So we have to keep things random. But they are split into 2 groups. Half of them get 2 extra fitness classes. The others have the same number of classes as before. So we have a control group and we have an experimental group. How do you control an experiment, and how did the researchers control the experiment? Well, control means to take charge or manipulate things in a way that you want. So these researchers, like I said, they are picking randomly. So they picked 500 people through their online system. They did not physically pick out who they wanted to be in it. So they didn't give their friends all the 2 extra classes, and the people they don't like the no classes. They completely randomized it. However, they kept the groups the same. Each group has 250 students or 250 people in there. So both of these should yield the same number of results. They also kept the time the same. So the 6 months for them to take that class or to not take classes. So the same amount of time to see how the retention was, how the retention did. And they made sure not to influence any further. So we didn't have a whole bunch of groups, or we didn't scatter how many classes they were all going to take. Everyone in this group got 2 extra fitness classes. No one in the other group got a class. So we kept it very similar. So everyone got the same experiment done on them. And that's what's going to lead us into designing our own experiments. So next week we will be designing our own experiments. And in order to truly control an experiment, we not only have to follow the scientific method that we just learned, but we also have to systematically lay out our experiments. We have to lay it out so that we can understand it, and that once we present our research to whatever audience, that they can follow along with our experiment as well. So experiments have to be easy to follow, and they have to be repeatable. And we'll talk about why this is a little bit later. So an outline for an experiment should have the following. So a hypothesis, an independent variable, a dependent variable, a control group, constants, and multiple trials. So hypothesis, like we said before, is a testable prediction or explanation for some sort of an event. Typically, when we do it in class, I like to use the if-then format for hypotheses. So this helps you to lay out what you are testing and what your expectations are going to be for the experiment. So for example, if the flowers are exposed to fertilizer, then the flowers will grow faster. Or if I give everyone in the class study guides for their tests, then they will do better on those tests. So I like to format it in the if-then format just so it lays out what your expectations are going to be for the experiment. So if we jump back to the example here, Super Fitness wants to know if offering more fitness classes helps them keep clients registered longer at the gym. So there is our hypothesis. If we offer more classes, then we will keep clients registered longer at the gym. The next thing is a variable. So you've probably seen variables in algebra and a couple different math classes. You usually see it like x, y, 2x, those sorts of things. In science, we don't necessarily use the variables in this case, but we aren't going to use the letters in this case, but we are going to control different factors within the experiment. We call those variables. So the independent variable is the factor that you are specifically changing in the experiment. So between all of your groups, the independent variable is what's going to change. So our lab next week will have paper towels and absorbency and see which one's the best. So we're going to use 4 different types of paper towels, and in this case, that would be our independent variable. Some other classes may have testing chemicals on different organisms. That's another lab we'll be doing. In that case, the different chemicals will be the independent variable. Once we measure that, the measurement is the dependent variable. So this is going to be what changes as a result of the independent variable. So if we say that our independent variable is the type of paper towel, then the dependent variable is going to be the rate of absorption, of the absorbance of water. Or if our independent variable is the type of chemical that we're going to use, the dependent variable, what we're going to measure, is how that affects the organism. So it could be heart rate, it could be movement, or it could be some other factor. So if we jump back to our example here with the fitness, so we have 2 different groups, and the dependent variable or the independent variable is going to be whether or not they are offered classes. So we have one group that gets offered the 2 classes and one that does not. The dependent variable there, what we're trying to measure, is going to be how many registered clients we have from that after our 6 months. The other things we have to do in an experiment is keep things constant. We need to make sure that we are only measuring one thing at a time. We do this in a couple different ways. So the first up is a control group. So this is one group that we have that is specifically not manipulated in the experiment. So we consider these to be normal conditions or normal behaviors in our experiment. So we will not be manipulating this. We want to have a baseline that we can compare all of our different examples to. So for example, in the chemical effects on Daphnia Lab, we will be comparing them to a wide variety of chemicals, but in order to figure out what our baseline is, we have to compare it to water. So these Daphnia live in water normally, and so we want to see what their normal heart rate or normal behavior is going to be before we start mixing in different chemicals. In our example back previously, the control group is the group that doesn't have any extra classes, the ones that aren't specifically being offered anything, because that's our normal conditions. Normally they don't get offered those classes, so by having those 2 extra classes, we can compare if that helps retain more people. We also have constants. So constants are any other factors, any other variables that are not being tested in the experiment, so they have to be kept stable. So if we were to do an experiment outside where we were measuring plant growth, we would have to make sure that a lot of things were kept the same. Temperature, wind speed, water or precipitation, all of those would have to be considered so that we could keep this as stable as possible. We don't want any other factors influencing our variables. Maybe it was rainy a day, which caused a lot of the plants that were growing normally to rot or to die. So that could throw off our experiment and skew our results, which is not what we want to see. The last thing is the number of trials. So experiments, like I said, have to be repeatable, not only by you, but by others. In science, we like to peer edit each other. We like to make sure that people aren't lying about their data. So what we do is when we publish our results, we make sure that we include a list of steps to see that other people can go back and try this same experiment and see what they get. Not only that, but if you want to continue the experiment, if you want to go even further and maybe test a different variable, you have to be able to know what you did and how you did it so that you can manipulate it further and change different things. So more often that an experiment is going to be conducted, we are going to get stronger results. So the more data you have from your experiment, the better your results and the better your conclusions can be. And of course, samples have to be chosen randomly, just so we don't get any bias in there, we don't get any influence into our results that could shift the outcome of that experiment. So take a moment, pause the video. We have 2 different experiments here. One has a sample of 5 people, one has a sample of 1/4 of the people. Which of those do you think would have better and stronger results? Okay, so the answer, of course, is the one on the right. If we have a larger sample size, we have more data that we can collect. If we give everyone in here a survey about something, we will get more results from this side than we would from these 5 people. Now, the populations are also different sizes, so there may be some comparison to be made between the group or the sample size or the total population size, but overall, this is going to give us better results than a small sample. So once we do our experiment, once we analyze our results, the best thing you can do is share your conclusions and share your results. So we do this in a few ways as scientists. Research papers and research posters are going to help a lot for getting our points across. For example, this is a lab report we are going to be reading in class about the effects of music on plant growth. But these lab reports help us to explain what we did, how we did it, and how we got our results, so that other people can see our results, maybe build off of that, or they can take these results and try it for themselves and see how they do. You can also attend research seminars and research conferences. For example, this is a poster that I did during my time as a research student in college on the effects of caves and body size. So I was comparing aquatic invertebrates and how caves lead to different adaptations in their bodies, longer eye or longer antenna, smaller eyes, body size, that sort of thing. And if there is enough support, your hypothesis could eventually, through a lot of work and a lot of research, develop into a law or a theory. So laws don't come about often. Laws are very specific statements that explain something in nature that always occurs predictably. So for example, the law of gravity is a scientific law. We have conditions that always have to be met, that are always going to be met no matter what. So objects always fall towards a center of mass at 9.8 meters per second squared. That is something that mathematically can be proven. We have done it on multiple different planets. We've tried on the moon dropping a feather and a hammer, and they fell at the same rate, even, well, given no air resistance and things like that. So things always fall at the same rate. That is a law. Theories, on the other hand, are broad explanations for observations or events, but they aren't 100% proven. There's still research, and there's always revisions that can help to improve these theories. So they are very important. We're going to see a lot of theories in biology. You probably have heard of the Big Bang Theory. We'll talk about cell theory. We'll talk about the theory of evolution. But theories are going to help explain different observations or different events, but they aren't completely proven. There's always going to be some sort of skepticism that helps or that prevents us from completely accepting this. So for example, a piece of evidence that we use to explain the theory of evolution is that different organisms all have the same bone structure, so the same bones in their bodies as well as in their hands, and that comes from a common ancestor that we all shared at some point. So where we will continue with this is in class you will get a lab equipment activity. What we're going to do with this is we're going to go through different pieces of equipment that we use in the lab. I want you to get familiar with them. I want you to have a little cheat sheet to identify them. So you will need to know what the equipment is, what it looks like, and what it is used for, so that whenever we get into the lab, I don't have to waste any time. We can jump right in and you guys can have fun exploring the different things that we're going to be talking about. So this will be quizzed on. I'll discuss the details in class, but if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me through my email. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you may have about the videos or about anything in class.